From the moment we are born, we are like a sponge, absorbing a complex level of information. As kids, we are born into a preconceived and already developed world, where we are encouraged to look at other sentient living beings differently, by visiting them at zoos, from behind bars or in cages, teaching us that it's normal to confine and enslave other living beings, so long as they are othered. Zoos and aquariums condition our young minds to accept the exploitation of other living conscious beings, or the mistreatment of other species, so long as they are different from us. Essentially teaching us a eugenics-based ideology toward all other life forms, that will later go on to include our own species. This essentially colonial mindset toward how we interact with nature and our environment is directly translated to our own species. A conquest of life. We have seen this historically play out with indigenous human zoos, and freak shows at circuses. This common everyday activity subconsciously teaches us all to develop an indifference toward those who are, well, different. We have seen this with other species to the extremes, through the use of factory farming, and then we historically saw how this translated to our own species through Nazi concentration camps in Germany. This has led many philosophers and psychologists to realize that there is a profound danger in teaching our species to develop apathy toward sentient beings, so long as they're different to us. This too has directly led to an acceptance of inequality among our own species. This has also led to a cyclic and self-destructive system of trading around the world that has been bringing us back to colonial-based ideologies, whereby we develop a belief that we, whether as individuals or as a specific racial ethnicity or species, are somehow superior to all others, and therefore we normalize invading others' territory to claim the land as ours, or torturing and slaughtering others, and destroying a whole race of people, a culture, or a whole species of animals, or even mass clearing land, and destroying whole species of native vegetation, just because it's different to us. We have seen these similar behaviors develop within workplaces, where factory workers dislike their job and get mistreated by their bosses, and then when they are promoted to management, they begin to mistreat and exploit their colleagues who are in inferior roles at the workplace. This psychological hierarchy benefits absolutely no one and nothing, yet causes huge amounts of self-destruction and damage to others. Because all of us are others to someone or something. This whole hierarchical system of othering living beings is a psychologically unhealthy system that was literally built by psychopathic eugenicists who had originally become wealthy and politically influential over the years through farming and mining, or through inheritance from modern-day pirates known then as explorers or captains. These sorts of industries, such as military exploration for colonization, food farming, as well as banking and mining minerals, have always relied upon the exploitation of fellow human workers, other living beings and the environment.
The government agency that put these guys together was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, because they wanted to breed a better species of man also. So these guys obtained immense amounts of corporate philanthropy to back their ideas. I'm talking here about corporate philanthropy engaged in ethnic cleansing. The Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Harriman Railroad fortune, pouring the equivalent of millions into the coffers of these gentlemen to establish research facilities on Long Island and elsewhere that would study how best to eliminate all of the defective, unwanted, unfit, and unacceptable types of human beings that they considered eugenically out of bounds. Now, what were some of their methods that they wanted? The first method that they thought about, one of the first, was gas chambers, public gas chambers. Now, remember, we're talking about the first 20 years of the 20th century, and they thought that the best idea was to march these guys into public gas chambers in groups, organized on a township or a county or a village basis, and within a period of time, these guys would disappear. But they concluded that our society was not ready for gas chambers. Even still, some individuals freelanced. For instance, there were mental hospitals in Illinois, one in particular that I describe in the book in Lincoln, Illinois, who fed their new patients milk from tubercular cows. And in so doing, infected these new patients, and then they allowed them to sleep in open dormitories to cross-infect the others, and by this method they would have a 30 to 40% death rate of new patients. And tuberculosis, of course, was in that era as bad, if not worse, than AIDS is today. There were other doctors who would leave newborn infants who were defective or deformed lying without any help or nutrition on the delivery table. One in particular gained national notoriety. He was called the Black Stork. He was such a hero of the eugenics movement. They actually made a movie about this guy, which you could see at the corner cinema for 25 cents or sometimes a nickel. But in the main, they believed that euthanasia would not achieve what they wanted to achieve. And so instead, they opted for forced surgical sterilization. And they got it. They obtained legislation in 27 states that forcibly sterilized some 60,000 Americans. In addition to forced surgical sterilization, there was marriage restriction, marriage annulment. If they didn't like who you were married, they unmarried you. And, of course, there was the effort to create concentration camps, which they called farms or colonies, for those who were feeble-minded, so-called feeble-minded, or racially unacceptable. They started out by calling these colonies for the feeble-minded. There were several in New Jersey, in Massachusetts, and eventually hundreds of thousands of individuals were incarcerated and then forcibly sterilized because they were deemed to be unfit. Now, what kind of people are we talking about who are unfit? We're talking about Southern Italians. We're talking about Eastern European Jews. We're talking about blacks, Indians. We're talking about Asians. And we're talking about white guys with brown hair. They believed that white guys with brown hair, the hillbillies, the hill folk, many of which were in these parts of Tennessee, were basically bastardizations and mongrelizations of the white Nordic ideal that they lionized. In fact, the state of Virginia published a booklet entitled Mongrel Virginians about these mongrel human beings. And they came up with a number of ideas on how to identify these people. And one of them was the alpha test and the beta test. It was a mental measurement test. And this mental measurement test might ask a Southern Italian who knew every opera and aria about a Broadway musical. He'd come into Ellis Island, they'd ask him a question about Broadway musicals. You might get a black guy from the farm who had never been to a big city, and they would ask him something about a cosmopolitan magazine. You might get a Baptist kid from rural America who would, of course, never smoked. They'd ask him about tobacco ads. They would ask people about tennis rackets who didn't even know what tennis was. And by this methodology, they were able to conclude that 70 to 80% of the Jews were morons, 70 to 80% of the blacks were morons, and these people were worthy of sterilization so that they could not perpetuate their kind. This test, the alpha and beta test, was ultimately evolved into something we know today as the IQ test. It's the same basic test, but it's evolved. Now, there were so many things that were upside down about this. The ophthalmologists of America, if you can possibly believe this, went on a national crusade to identify everybody with a vision problem, find their entire family, round them up, put them in concentration camps, and forcibly sterilize them as a way to improve vision in America. There's a whole chapter about that. They actually took the first step with a bill entered into the New York legislature, although this bill was defeated. Although these laws were in 27 states, there were many people who felt that this was unconstitutional, and so there was a kind of a go slow approach. And so a fraudulent collusive lawsuit was created in Virginia for the purpose of making eugenics a test case. The state of Virginia wanted to sterilize the mother, the daughter, and the granddaughter of one family. It was a famous case, Carrie Buck, her mother, and her daughter. So the state of Virginia colluded with the court-appointed attorneys for Carrie Buck and wound a fraudulent appeal right up through the Supreme Court. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a staunch eugenicist, ruled for the majority that it is better for all the world, that's a quote, that these 3 generations be sterilized. Quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And in so doing, opened the floodgates. And ultimately, as I said, some 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized, many without even knowing it. Some, they said, were voluntarily sterilized. They would get some girl from the hills of Virginia or Kentucky or Tennessee, and they would ask her, hi, honey, do you like the movies? Do you like the cartoons? She'd say, yeah, I do. Do you mind if we do something to help out your health? She'd say, sure. And they say, fine, voluntary sterilization. Ultimately, this was not only national policy enshrined in legislation in 27 states, it became the law of the land. And backing it up was fake science and fake academics from the highest corridors of Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Princeton. It was the greatest of our universities that provided the sham science to back up these racists. Now, just so you understand, we are not talking about a bunch of guys running around in a pickup truck with a Confederate flag behind them and a gun rack in the back window. We're talking about the brightest and the best, the elite, about the greatest America had to offer. And all these laws were endorsed and debated by 27 legislatures in 27 states. This was not an isolated matter. This was not a matter that never went into to implementation. It was a national attempt to engage in ethnic cleansing, and it was supported by corporate philanthropy. Now, it wasn't enough to do this in the United States. These guys, the American eugenics movement, wanted to do this worldwide. And so the Carnegie Institution began to sponsor pseudoscientific medical journals, international congresses, and research fellowships around the world, especially in Europe, to proliferate our ideas into other countries. And we did this successfully, getting cohorts of American eugenics to sponsor legislation in Canada, in Belgium, in Scandinavia, and a particular pet project of the American eugenics movement was Germany. And they successfully transplanted American ideas of eugenics into Germany into the 20s and ultimately the 30s. And in the 20s, it came to the attention of a guy called Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler studied American eugenics, American eugenic laws, and American eugenic theories, and he conceded openly that he admired him. He admired them. And he took his pre-existing racism, his pre-existing anti-Semitism, and wrapped it in the idea of eugenics to scientize and medicalize his theories, and then switched the word Nordic race with Aryan race to create the Nazi quest for the master race. And he even acknowledged in fan mail to American eugenicists, such as one to Madison Grant, America's chief racist, from the American Museum of Natural History, when he said, "Your book is my Bible." And so I've been writing about the Holocaust for 35 years, and I finally understood what Nazism and the Holocaust was about. I've always said you can document it, but you'll never explain it. But if we listen to the words of Hitler and his inner circle in a common phrase that they used, he said, National Socialism is nothing but applied biology. And so it seems that even more than a war of territorial conquest and economic plunder, this was a eugenic war, a biological war backed up by a genocidal military. And in fact, the Rockefeller Foundation spent millions to build eugenic institutions from the ground up. And one of the institutions that they were building from the ground up was controlled by a guy called Ottmar Freiherr Verschuur. And Verschuur, we might say, was the chief Nazi eugenicist. And Verschuur received grants from Rockefeller. And Verschuur had an interest in twins. In fact, twin research was the holy grail of research for the eugenics movement, because with twins, you could unlock the mysteries of defective reproduction. And with twins, you could reveal the secret of multiplication of the master race. And Verschuur had an assistant, and the assistant's name was Josef Mengele. And Verschuur sent Mengele into Auschwitz to finish the program originally started and funded by Rockefeller. And so millions of Jews and Gypsies and other Europeans were unloaded, boxcar after boxcar, into Auschwitz amongst terror and noise. And the one word they each heard twice was the word twins. We want twins. And these twins were gathered, and horrible experiments were done on them. Horrible. They were fused together, their veins were tied together, their eyeballs were experimented with. They were given terrible viruses, painful injections in the eyes. And we have spent a half a century trying to understand the unfathomable nightmare experiments of Josef Mengele. But every American eugenicist understood what a Mengele would do, because every day Mengele worked on his scientific reports, his clinical autopsies, and dispatched them 2 or 3 times each week to his boss, Verschuur. In fact, after the Holocaust, Verschuur was actually welcomed back into the fold of scientific fellowship by his colleagues in California. Now, after the Holocaust, at Nuremberg, eugenics was deemed to be an act of genocide, a crime against humanity, and the Americans went underground, and the Germans on trial quoted the words of Oliver Wendell Holmes in their own defense. They entered the California statutes, and California at all times was the state where 1/2 to 1/3 of all sterilizations took place. And they were found guilty. And then the Americans changed the name of American eugenics to human genetics. Same guys, same buildings, same philanthropic funds, same laboratories. And over the span of 1 or 2 generations, this science of human genetics has evolved into the modern science of human engineering that we know today, which is peopled by sensitive scientists who are trying to improve mankind and fight disease. And we certainly welcome and invite every genetic miracle that we can have. But now there's a resurgence of the same impulse that caused eugenics in the first place. I'm speaking of newgenics.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
Elites to do something even more radical than just build digital dictatorships. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it. Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology well enough, and nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo nor the KGB could do it. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. We succeed in hacking and engineering life. This will be not just the greatest revolution in the history of humanity. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life 4 billion years ago. For 4 billion years, nothing fundamental changed. Evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds. The IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud, these are the new driving forces of evolution. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste. Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
Dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. It's a really, really bad state of affairs. And we compound the problem, right? We curate our lives around this perceived sense of perfection.
But it's because they're hacking people's brains and programming them to get hooked into this technology and stay on it for as long as possible via this release of short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops. It just keeps you on like an addict.
We call it in the trade the dopamine hit. That's what it's called in Facebook, for instance. The founders of the great Silicon Valley spying empires like Facebook have publicly declared that they intentionally included addictive schemes in their designs.
You know, the inventors understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. When it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people, it literally changes your relationship with society. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains.
Consumer internet businesses are about exploiting psychology. We want to psychologically figure out how to manipulate you as fast as possible and then give you back that dopamine hit. We did that brilliantly at Facebook. Instagram has done it. WhatsApp has done it. Exploiting psychology of mass populations of people.
So let's talk about this for just a second. Dopamine's a neurotransmitter. It's one of a series of chemicals in your brain that mediates the transmission of electrical signals between your neurons. And different neurotransmitters do different things, but dopamine is specifically the brain's pleasure drug. Its highest concentrations are associated with the areas of the central nervous system believed to be responsible for your feelings and emotions of pleasure and extreme happiness. So it's associated with reward and motivation. It's the brain's reward system. It works on dopamine. And so you could really easily see how this would fit into addiction with something like alcohol or nicotine or crack or chocolate donuts or Netflix binges or insert substance or activity here, whatever it is.
This is what I would call almost a stealthy addiction. We'll get them hooked through a scheme of rewards and punishment. And the rewards are when you're retweeted. The punishment is when you're treated badly by others online. And then within that, we'll very gradually start to leverage that to change them. So it's this very kind of stealthy manipulation of the population.
If something is stimulating high levels of dopamine to be produced, and the person continues doing that thing constantly, the levels of dopamine in their brain will remain abnormally high. And initially that's going to feel really good, but eventually the person's going to become desensitized to that level of dopamine and have to do it more and more and more to get the same pleasure and rewards. And it basically hooks the person like an addiction, and they get burned out because they just keep trying to get that high that they initially got from the reward system, and they have to just keep doing it more and more and more.
You know, it's a vice thing. It's something humans have been dealing with for millennia. For thousands of years, it's nothing new, except that a lot of those behaviors, drugs and eating and sexual promiscuity, you don't normally do it in front of crowds of people for their applause, awaiting their approval. And it's normally tied, at least to some degree, with the taboo. You know, I mean, we recognize people that have these problems, and it generally doesn't affect everyone. But now all of a sudden we have a technology that everyone is using. Kids are using it. Old people are using it. Adults in general are doing their jobs on this stuff. Everyone is communicating and talking to each other through social media, and there's no taboo. And it's generally not recognized that this is an addictive behavior that's happening. You know, you wouldn't just mindlessly do drugs without thinking of the consequences, but you might use Facebook without thinking twice because it seems harmless, it seems blasé, and everyone he knows on there.
Well, that's the thing. We're to the point now where they've done polls. The average American spends 24 hours a week online. And I don't think that counts people who work a job that's online also. I think the average person is spending at least one day out of every week fully 24 hours online. So that's how much it's being used. And 62% of people, at least in this study that they talked about at MIT Technology Review from January 2018, 62% say that the internet is important for maintaining social relationships. So they're not able to maintain their social relationships without it.
And it is a point in time where people need to hard break from some of these tools and the things that you rely on. We all have never taken a step back and actually asked ourselves, how should we be interacting with these things now, 7 years into it? I can't control that. I can control my decisions, which is I don't use this shit. I can control my kids' decisions, which is they're not allowed to use this shit. But everybody else has to soul search a little bit more about what you're willing to do, because your behaviors, you don't realize it, but you are being programmed.
So this has become enmeshed in society. You can't, I mean, if you want to be a functioning member of modern society in many ways, you have to use the internet. It's part of it. But what these people are saying when they speak of dopamine is essentially saying that your brain, through the use of algorithms on these platforms, the way they've been set up to take as much of your time as possible, to get as much data out of you as possible, and to keep you coming back for that dopamine hit, what they're basically saying is they have hijacked your brain. A former Google product manager came out and told 60 Minutes that some of the programmers in Silicon Valley actually call it brain hacking. And then he referred to his cell phone as a slot machine. And he says, every time I check my phone, I'm playing the slot machine to see what did I get? What likes did I get? What notifications did I get? He says this is one way to hijack people's minds and create and form a habit. So you make it so that someone's pulling a lever and sometimes they get an exciting reward.
The pigeon was studied in a uniform box, one it quickly grew used to. The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behavior of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered.
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. A reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something, but you don't reinforce every time. You're perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute or something like that.
It's a design technique that's been embedded inside of all of these products, inside of all of this social media. In fact, it came out that Instagram was actually doing a thing where they would withhold likes from people so that they would receive a larger bunch of likes later on for a larger burst of dopamine. They'd have people get disappointed because they'd post a photo or something and they wouldn't have hardly any likes. And so the initial negative outcome of being disappointed of not getting likes would then be priming their brain for the large burst of dopamine they would get when a huge bunch of likes suddenly came through. They're basically using a variable reward schedule on people the way they would do to rats in a science lab.
One of the schedules which is very effective is what we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices. People gamble because of the schedule of the reinforcement that follows, and this is true of all gambling systems. They all have variable ratios built into them.
B.F. Skinner did it, and we showed it in The Minds of Men. James Old's experiment. He was electrically stimulating the reward center of the rat's brain.
In 1954, Olds created a reward map of the brain featuring locations where electrical stimulation caused mammals to come back for more. The reward map held true for rats, cats, monkeys, and humans. By 1961, James Olds made history after he implanted an electrode into the pleasure center of a lab rat's brain and conditioned it to trigger its own self-satisfying electrical stimulation.
This is a device which trains the animal to turn on the stimulus for himself.
And they showed that not only would the rat press the pedal over and over and over, hundreds of times per minute, just like people do with their computer mice, but that rats in various experiments, they would starve and forego food. They would avoid sex in order to keep clicking on the button. They would even endure great pain. They would get shocks in order to keep pressing the lever.
I will electrify the grid. The animal must cross an area that gives a very painful shock to the feet in order to get to the pedal and stimulate the brain. This shows a rat is willing to pay a very high price in order to get to the pedal.
And they would do it until they died. So none of the other survival instincts overrode or kicked in. And that's how dangerous the dopamine-driven feedback loop is.
The problem is that behaviors techniques are often invisible to the person who's being manipulated. And this has a long history. This has been done for a long time. It used to be that the only way to be subjected to continuous observation and modification was to either be in an experiment, or you could join a cult, or you could be in an abusive relationship. I mean, this has been done before, and often the people who are in these situations do not realize it's happening to them. In fact, the whole point is that it's sneaky.
And it's built into our communication. You're sitting there at the computer or standing around on your phone, and you're pushing buttons many times per minute over and over, and you're checking it. And when you have lull time, you're checking it again. And it's not only that behavior, but they're building in a system of social credit where your actual status in society, your worthiness to be lended money, your rating on Airbnb type of site or something is based on whether or not people approve of what you've done before. And it sort of follows you and tracks you and potentially haunts you.
It's a mechanical approach to manipulating people. And because it's so algorithmic, it doesn't involve direct communication, and people don't get the cues to understand what's happening with them.
I can control my kids' decisions, which is they're not allowed to use this shit. But everybody else has to soul search a little bit more about what you're willing to do, because your behaviors, you don't realize it, but you are being programmed.
That looks like a butler. His name was Don Regan, the chairman of Merrill Lynch. Regan then became White House chief of staff as the president started to fade.
Then they should give the president what 43 governors have, a line item veto. And then
Who tells the president to speed it up? The man from Merrill Lynch, that's who.
The handler. Watch this guy's facial expressions as he speaks to the president, and watch his utter disdain he shows for nothing but a puppet. Interviewers or handlers are trained to handle the situation in case an interview doesn't go as planned or the puppets say the wrong thing. Interviewers and puppets are trained and groomed to answer and ask prearranged questions in a very specific way. But no matter how trained the puppet is, there are certain cues revealed by body language and facial expressions that cannot be hidden. It always reveals the emotions, deceptions, and fear but the public would never notice it because they aren't looking for it.
There's a group of women in the audience that wish you would.
No.
Girls?
Whoa.
All right. Sorry. Yeah, that's okay.
Can you maybe I should take off the hoodie.
Take off the hood.
Go ahead.
You want
What
to?
the hell?
You want? Go ahead. Here. Let me get someone. You all right?
Body language is key. Learn to pay attention to cues. Even the groomed puppets cannot completely hide deceptions and emotions.
What is it? Making the
world more open and connected.
Oh my God! It's like a secret
Cool.
cult. Look at that! Making the world open and connected. Stream graph platform, and this weird symbol in the middle that is probably for the Illuminati.
Now let's take a look at the super genius, Elon Musk.
The boost stage, which is about 70% of the cost of the rocket. So
Which cost is that? How much is that?
well, I mean, it's sort of on the order of $30 to $35 million.
Right.
When somebody is retrieving a memory, they look to the right. When somebody is creating a fiction, they look up and to the left.
Do you think that Palantir has ever scraped data from Facebook?
Senator, I'm not aware of that.
That is the look of shame and deception as he looks down and to the left. Why parade puppets and pretend these are their private sector companies? One reason is to hide what these companies really are.
You said back then that Facebook would always be free. Is that still your objective? Well, if so, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Another play to distract people so they'll think that the government is actually trying to limit the sharing of personal information, when the government is actually the one collecting it. We are supposed to believe that this guy is a super genius that runs all these important companies.
Everyone in this room is inspired by you. Who are you inspired by?
Well, Kanye West, obviously. So what do you say?
So you want to save that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I tell my team, it's like, imagine there was a pallet of cash that was plummeting through the atmosphere.
I think Mars should really have great bars. The Mars bar. Sorry.
How do you plan a business where you know, the rocket business, you know some of these things are going to blow up on the launch pad? How does the business plan work?
I don't really have a business plan.
And if you're in space, wings are not very useful because there's no air. And then if you want to go somewhere other than Earth, there's also no runways.
You know, must remember.
The real life Tony Stark?
What would be your mediocre superpower? Now, this is absurd to ask you because Tony Stark is partially modeled after you.
Right.
So you actually are sort of have real. So we were asking you to
He doesn't technically
downgrade.
have a superpower, I guess, except like inventing technology or something.
Right.
Young people globally want to be like Elon Musk.
Young people globally want to be like Elon Musk. What's your advice to them?
Movies about these, quote, geniuses' lives back up the false illusion that you can be anything and become a billionaire too. With these fictional backstories, they sell the narrative of how these geniuses rose to become financial giants. Movies like Iron Man back up the false story of Elon Musk and his companies. Made-for-TV movie Pirates of Silicon Valley back up the false narrative of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. The movie The Social Network backs up the false narrative of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Steve Jobs got his own movie titled Steve Jobs to back up his false narrative, just to name a few. These are supposed to be based on true stories and in people's minds that see these movies they cannot decipher between truth and fiction. Musk reveals the truth about his life as a puppet and the strain it causes a person to live a lie completely under the controller's thumb.
Young people globally want to be like Elon Musk. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, it's not as much fun being me as you'd think. I don't know.
You don't think so?
No, I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure I want to be me.
Okay.
Elon Musk and other puppets play parts in movies and TV because they do the same thing in life, just playing a part. They are all actors.
There you go.
You gotta be kidding me.
Sorry?
You're Elon Musk.
I am?
You have a 9:30 dinner.
Perfect. I'll be there at 11. Is this us?
Absolutely. It can be.
Great. Make it us.
Okay. Mr. Musk, how are you?
Congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you very much.
Elon,
Thank you.
those Merlin engines are fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, good idea for an electric jet.
You do?
Yeah.
Then we'll make it work.
Thank you. Where are you from, boss? Michigan.
Oh, Michigan. You're in the car business?
No, printing. Ned Fleming.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Tesla Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Wow.
Good luck, Machete. Get the bastard.
But lots of people have played cameo roles in films, right? Then what about this one, where he plays the role of an extra, just like a struggling actor?
Dick, your family now. Tobacco takes care of its own, eh?
Thank you, sir.
Doesn't seem like a cameo role to me. You can barely see who it is. Seems like someone trying to get into acting. All the world's a stage.
So these same unethical values and unhealthy mindsets actually caused these people to become successful, and this led to them using that money and influence to buy up all the banks. The agriculture and mining industries also produced a lot of waste products and leftovers that allowed them to later transform this waste into new businesses like chemical companies, that went on to develop pharmaceutical companies, pesticides, fertilizers, and chemical and biological weapon facilities for the military during world wars and crises. These psychopathic business people would always do well financially during any of these times of crisis, leading to an incentive to actually cause or influence crises such as disease outbreaks or forever wars. And with the countless industries they made from these original companies, they grew them larger like plants, and used the money they made from them to buy up the educational facilities and the majority of mainstream media publications. All of these people were members of occult societies like the Freemasons, and all of these secret societies' members were also members or supporters of the Royal Eugenics Society England and America.
What? Yeah, this one went down in history, all right.
The Guild of the Gilded Age came out of the earth. But someone had to go in there and get it. And that someone sure wasn't going to be anyone from the elite robber baron Rockefeller family, who owned and operated Colorado Fuel and Iron, the largest coal company in the West at the time, controlling some 72,000 acres of coal land at its height. Working conditions in these mines, including those owned by one of the wealthiest families in American history at the time, were awful. Miners worked in extremely dangerous and deadly conditions for 12-hour days, 7 days a week, to make a measly 80 cents per ton of coal. The miners took home an average of $1.68 a day, which, adjusted for inflation, is just under $30 a day in 2022. They weren't paid for time they spent prepping mine areas to minimize hazards to workers such as cave-ins, as this was referred to as dead work. The miners were required to live in company shacks and otherwise isolated company towns with curfews overseen by company guards. With no choice but to educate their children in company-dominated schools, and forced to use company script to shop in company-owned stores, where prices were quite high. This model of secluded living, where every single aspect of worker life was dominated by the corporation, was not random. It was by design, run out of something called the CF&I Sociological Department, because the company had that, which was headed up by Dr. Richard Warren Corwin. Dr. Corwin was a surgeon with the Colorado National Guard, a member of the Colorado State Board of Health, and a 33rd degree Freemason who belonged to the ancient Arabic Order of the Mystic Shrine, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and the Knights Templar of Colorado. He was also chief surgeon for CF&I for 49 years and an outspoken eugenicist. Eugenics being the pseudo-scientific philosophy of the betterment of humanity through hereditary manipulations, including forced institutionalization, forced sterilization, and forced abortions. Dr. Corwin also happened to run the CF&I Sociological Department for a number of years as the Rockefellers took control of the company in the early 1900s, well before the Ludlow Massacre. In fact, Rockefeller Jr. was one of America's leading eugenics proponents, if not the biggest proponent in American history, and had spent at least $100 million on eugenics-related programs. Some of that money funding eugenics-related programs coming out of CF&I's sociology department, and therefore being implemented on the workers and their families. And when I say Dr. Corwin was a eugenicist, this is a man who proudly advocated for government-backed eugenics programs, including the teaching of eugenics education in schools, which he referred to as the only hope of improving our race or saving our nation. And he referred to children in categories such as the feeble-minded or mentally defective, which he separated out from the, quote, morons, the higher class of defectives. Dr. Corwin would go on in the last years before his death to accept a nomination into the Colorado Eugenics Committee, which was created to push pro-eugenics propaganda and legislation in the state. And the man has literally been described as, quote, perhaps the most prominent practitioner of this ideology in Colorado during its heyday, by history teacher Brian Clayson and history professor at Colorado State University Jonathan Rees. This CF&I industrial welfare plan, as it's referred to, was based on an early understanding of applied sociology, which just sounds like a nice way of saying social engineering, in part to combat worker strikes. The department implemented the settlement house model, as it was called, which was intended in part to, quote, foster labor stability by transforming the lifestyles and habits of the immigrant workers and their families, end quote, and to inspire loyalty to the company, according to Professor of Sociology at UT Arlington Frank Weed. In his University of Colorado PhD thesis regarding the irony of the sociological department's educational reforms in CF&I coal camps, Bradley Bartels noted that these social engineering endeavors were heavily guided by efforts to assimilate their largely immigrant workforce, including the school-aged children, and train them to become more docile menial laborers, living under an even greater degree of socioeconomic and political corporate control over their lives. However, it would seem the company's programs included progressive educational reforms for both children and the parents who attended night classes, which seemingly backfired, actually increasing autonomy and class solidarity, resulting in social and economic empowerment for both the adults and children living in these camps. In other words, it sounds like people of all ages in these camps became educated enough to realize how badly they were getting hosed by CF&I, and empowered enough to do something about it. But I digress. To say company corruption was an issue is an understatement. Explosions at these mines causing mass casualties were sadly common. For example, an explosion in the CF&I mine near Primero, also in Los Animas County, killed 24 miners in 1907, and another 75 miners were killed in another explosion at the exact same mine in 1910. Following the second explosion, the Colorado Bureau of Labor Statistics actually used the phrase cold-blooded barbarism in describing CF&I's neglect of safety measures in its mine. These working conditions were not only incredibly dangerous, but the living conditions in these company towns were also quite pitiful. After a mine exploded in Starkville, Colorado, killing 56 miners, an inspector sent in by local authorities made a report describing the conditions these miners and their families lived in as smacking of the direst poverty. Most of the company homes, which sat in the shadow of the coal washers and were bathed in smoke from the coal ovens and covered in coal dust, did not have running water or sewerage. The inspector wrote, "The people reflect their surroundings. Slatternly dressed women and unkempt children throng the dirty streets and alleys of the camp. One is forced to the conclusion that these people must be very poorly paid, else they would not be content to live in this fashion." Due to the harsh working conditions for meager pay and abysmal living conditions, thousands of CF&I miners went on strike in September 1913 after attempting to organize into the United Mine Workers of America. But CF&I refused to meet with union organizers. In response, the miners were promptly thrown out of company housing, so they erected tent cities at various sites in what was known as the Southern Coal Fields in Colorado near the mines to be able to continue to strike and block scab replacements in the meantime. Of these tent cities, the one near Ludlow was the largest. The miners had what seemed like some pretty basic demands by today's standards. They wanted an 8-hour workday. They wanted compensation for digging coal at a rate of a ton being 2,000 pounds, instead of the company's use of the long ton at 2,200 pounds. And they wanted the weight checkmen to be elected by the miners, the idea being the company's weightmen were not exactly the most honest with their calculations. They wanted to be paid for the so-called dead work required to prep mines to minimize hazards to their lives on the job. They wanted the right to choose where they lived, what doctors they saw, and the right to shop at any store, not just the company's overpriced one. They also asked for semi-monthly payment of wages in lawful money, not scrip, and they wanted the union to be recognized as their bargaining agent. Strikers also wanted actual enforcement of Colorado's laws. Imagine working a job where you really just want the laws already on state books to be enforced as written and passed. As Colorado had one of the highest mining death rates in the whole country at the time, double the national average. But that's what happens when a political system is dominated by the elite owners of major corporations, as opposed to being the servants of the people who elected them. In response to the strike, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company used a portion of its special budget that it held for dealing with union issues to hire the notorious Pinkerton-esque Baldwin Felts Agency to protect the mines and harass the striking miners. These agents formed goon squads that would drive around in armored cars with machine guns on raids, firing into the tent cities, as they reportedly did on October 17, 1913, when they shot one little girl in the face, another little boy in the legs, and killed a miner.
Ultimately a boon to their whole agenda. The blowback against the Rockefeller family after Ludlow was immense. The public was seething with anger about the emerging details, combined with an already tarnished public image. Just a couple years before, the Supreme Court ruled in May 1911 that Standard Oil, in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, had to be broken up. These 1911 antitrust hearings reminded the American public of the ruthless domination exercised by Standard Oil and the obscene wealth and power afforded its most infamous elite dynasty, now widely resented throughout the country. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller family had been crafting its plans to create a massive philanthropic foundation, following in the footsteps of the Carnegie Endowment and the Russell Sage Foundation. But even that was controversial. So controversial that the Rockefellers ultimately weighed against seeking a federal charter, which would invite greater public scrutiny, and instead obtained a charter at the state level in New York, where they could still direct their agenda. Testing the waters in the years leading up to their official creation in May 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation found that the public was, at the onset, suspicious of the undue powers associated with the spending of massive funds on public policy. This foundation was much more than a charity organization or even a tax shelter for the ultra-wealthy to shield against the inheritance tax, among other cards in the Monopoly community chess deck. It has been proven to be a vehicle for radically changing public policy in medicine, science, education, and more. Its outsized influence utilized the emerging field of sociology in tandem with eugenics policies then in vogue and heavily backed by the Rockefellers personally, which were developed and applied by the Rockefeller Foundation and other influential figures to engineer a new breed of Americans. These major factors were happening in the backdrop of what otherwise appeared to be a conflict between pro-union miners and a massive industry that dominated Colorado and its politics. After the hot war front of the Coalfield War died down, there were a series of hearings before the Commission on Industrial Relations, with John D. Rockefeller Jr. testifying in both January 1915 and April 1915 and making some startling revelations. For one thing, he denied the worst of it all. There was no Ludlow massacre, that he was ignorant of conditions in Colorado, and that he knew nothing of the, quote, war. However, the correspondence obtained by Chairman Frank Walsh and read in detail during hearings proved otherwise. Rockefeller Jr. operated with notorious secrecy, but he was no innocent bystander. This headline from April 24, 1915 sums it up. Young Rockefeller had testified he knew nothing of conditions in coal fields, but letters indicated he was informed of every step and that his agents acted with his consent. Quote, "The committee today has made, as part of its record, a mass of correspondence not only showing the Rockefellers were in constant touch with every phase of the Colorado coal strike situation, but they knew the strike was coming and were prepared for it." Duh. I mean, did anyone really think that the Rockefellers were some kind of naive fools here? When cross-examined by Chairman Walsh, Rockefeller admitted that yes, he did have the power to reverse the decisions of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company's elections for its directors, its presidents, etc., as a memo from the chairman of the executive board revealed. The article says that, quote, "The evidence showed the inside workings of dummy directorship and absentee landlordism, and that Rockefeller notified these officers he would back them to the limit. The timeline of evidence made clear that, quote, no violence was committed until Troop A was formed, that the members of this troop did not wait until they were properly enrolled in the state militia, but shot up Ludlow a few days after they were organized, and, as many suspected, that these men were on the payroll of the company continuously." Walsh read from the letters and reports to show that Troop A, a volunteer organization, was formed of superintendents, clericals, and mine guards of the coal companies. Walsh then asked Rockefeller Jr., "Do you know that this troop fired into the tents of women and children at Ludlow and that they looted the dead and set fire to the tents of the people?" "I do not," Rockefeller Jr. replied in testimony. Another memo sent by Rockefeller Jr. to CF&I President Bowers indicated that the elder Rockefeller Sr. had been pleased by the news in the wake of the Ludlow massacre shootings. It stated, quote, "I know that Father has followed the events of the past few months in connection with the fuel company with unusual interest and satisfaction." Armed with this memo, Chairman Walsh sniped, "So your father was pleased when 5,000 men and their families went into the canyons to live rather than continue to work under existing conditions in the mining camp, when armed gunmen were sent to attack them, and when the Forbes tent colony had been riddled by machine guns?" Obviously, the tone of the writing in the memo was incendiary in the climate of public opinion. CF&I miners were forced to live in company housing under guard, compelled to buy from the company store, captive in sending their kids to company schools, and generally kept in isolation from the outside like some kind of cult.
The whole agenda is to create a one world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips. And this is given me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. I had a friend, Nick Rockefeller, okay, who was one of the Rockefeller family. And he, when I was running for governor in Nevada, he came to me, introduced himself to me through an attorney. And we became friends. We started talking about things. And I learned an awful lot from Mr. Rockefeller. And one of the things that we used to talk about was the ultimate plan of the banking industry, what they wanted to accomplish. And the goals of the banking industry, not just the Federal Reserve System, but the private banks in Germany and England, all over Italy, all over the world, they all work together. They're all central banks, and they're all part of the Communist Manifesto. You know, central banking is one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talk about America being a capitalistic country, but yet at the same time we have a central bank that plans everything for us, right? And the graduated income tax is another plank of the Communist Manifesto, right? So right there you have two major planks of the Communist Manifesto that have been brought in because of the Federal Reserve System, okay? So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers, and they're doing it in sections. The European currency, the euro, and the European Constitution is one part of it. Now they're trying to do it in America with the North American Union, right? And they want to create a new currency called the Amero, right? And the whole agenda is to create a one-world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is giving me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. And all money will be in your chips. And so instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. If they say you owe us this much money in taxes, they just deduct it out of your chip digitally.
Total control.
Total control. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people.
And that chip's connected to a database that has your purchasing records, what you do, what
everything.
you sell.
Everything is in there, you know? And so they want a one-world government controlled by them, everybody being chipped, all your money in those chips, and they control the chips, and they control people. And you become a slave. You become a serf to these people. That's their goal. That's their intentions.
Aujourd'hui, au bout de ça, on parle de puces qu'on pourra s'implanter. Ce sera quand, ça?
Certainement dans les 10 années à venir. Et d'abord, on va les implanter dans nos vêtements, c'est-à-dire wearables, comme on le dit. Et après, on pourrait s'imaginer qu'on les implante dans nos cerveaux ou dans nos topos. Et à la fin, peut-être il y a une communication directe entre notre cerveau et le monde digital. Ce que nous voyons, c'est une sorte de fusion du monde physique, digital et biologique.
On appelle quelqu'un, on n'a même plus le réflexe de devoir prendre un appareil, ça se fait naturellement. Hein. La technique continue le corps.
Oui, vous parlez et vous dites, je veux maintenant être connecté avec n'importe qui. Et d'abord, vous avez les robots personnalisés. Et j'ai vu que M. Zuckerberg a prédit qu'à la fin de l'année, il va avoir son robot, son butler personnalisé qui est à sa disposition.
Donc, comme dans Downton Abbey, on aura son butler personnel, son serviteur, son esclave.
Oui, mais il y a une différence. C'est un serviteur qui, avec l'intelligence artificielle, apprend et qui n'est pas seulement votre assistant pour des travaux manuels, qui peut vraiment être un partenaire intellectuel de vous.
So, make up your own mind. Is this a conspiracy theory?
This is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world. And this is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations back in 1992. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. And so many of us around the world think that, well, sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas. All systems have to be brought into harmony in order to control them all. Because when systems don't meet, when they're out of balance or not in sync with one another, they can't be controlled centrally. And the goal of Agenda 21 is one world government and total control from a central unit. Every nation that signed on to Agenda 21 has its local Agenda 21 plan. People in the United States are completely unaware of this. If I go out and talk about this, the United States press attacks me and calls me, which is totally ridiculous. It is but it's not a theory. It's a fact. The three pillars of United Nations Agenda 21 are economy, ecology, and equity, the 3 E's. And everyone sort of thinks that they know what that means, the idea of social equity. It must mean that, well, everyone's going to have access to clean water and clean air, and no one's property is going to be used as a dumping ground because they are at a poverty level. But really what social equity is about impoverishing huge portions of the population and bringing down the developed nations. Everything that we're looking at now is destined to collapse our economies. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. And what major corporations want in this development is to be able to have full movement of workers without borders or boundaries, to be able to move their goods through without regulations, and to reduce wages. And so this is the goal. So this is what you find with social equity. And of course, economy and ecology is about, these are the 3 circles: economy, ecology, and social equity. And where they meet in the center is balance. But really that balance is a communitarian balance. So it's not balance of well-being of the people. What it is it's a balance for corporations so that they can exploit and control and have populations in an area, in tightly packed, dense areas, so that they can be surveilled and managed. And this is what that balance looks like as far as the development of a totalitarian state is. The mainstream media is owned by 5 major corporations, and you're not going to get this information from the mainstream press. So you need to be your own press. You need to educate yourself. You need to get out there and educate your neighbors, your community, your real community. You need to help your children understand that they're being indoctrinated from pre-kindergarten to postgraduate school. All of us have a responsibility to ourselves and to others. This is true community, to work for personal freedom. And always remember that even though we work as a group, if we do work as a group, we're all individuals in those groups, and we answer only to ourselves. And this is essential. It's essential as free human beings. This is what we are. We are free, and we need to continue to be free. And I do believe that we will win, but we have to become aware that there is a fight, and then make our friends and our neighbors and our community aware as well, and work together.
Where did this prodigy come from? Bill was born in a wealthy family, a family of influence. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, came from a powerful banking family. His father, William Henry Gates Sr., was an attorney. Bill Jr. dropped out of Harvard University. Worried about the future of her son, Mary helped Bill set up Microsoft. She used her IBM connections to set up a deal between IBM and Microsoft. In 1991, she arranged a meeting between her son and Warren Buffett, the multi-billionaire who took Bill under his wings. Both of Bill's parents were heavily involved in family planning and eugenics. His father served on the board of Planned Parenthood.
My dad was head of Planned Parenthood, and it was very controversial to be involved with that.
Bill openly and proudly talks about these things and how they were discussed over dinner. From an early age, he was spoon-fed with the ideology of eugenics. In his 30s, Warren Buffett added to this with his enthusiasm on the subject. Buffett's foundation, the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, is a massive financial supporter of pro-abortion activities and population control policies. It is the largest funder of reproductive health and family planning in the world. We hope that by now you understand that those are just fancy words for eugenics. Bill Gates, a Rockefeller descendant, as we have shown in our COVID-19 documentary, was pushed forward with one goal in life and one goal alone. And that was not computer programming. His role in this world was determined by his bloodline. He was to become the face of population control and depopulation within the framework of Agenda 21.
That John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media, he also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was discovered that drugs could be produced from petroleum, America's top oil mogul ordered his army of propagandists to invert reality accordingly. Medicines used for thousands of years were suddenly classified as alternative, while the new, petroleum-based, highly addictive, and patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. After buying the German pharmaceutical company that manufactured chemicals of war for Adolf Hitler, Rockefeller leveraged his political influence by pressing Congress to declare natural healing modalities unscientific quackery. Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association and began offering massive grants to top medical schools under the mandate that only his approved curriculum be taught. Any mention of the healing powers of herbs, plants, and diet was erased from most medical textbooks. Doctors and professors who objected to Rockefeller's plan were crucified by the media, removed from the AMA, and stripped of their license to teach and practice medicine. Those who dared to speak out were arrested and jailed. When evidence began to emerge that petroleum-based medicines were causing cancer, Mr. Rockefeller founded the American Cancer Society, through which he suppressed that information. John D. Rockefeller is duly credited as the founder of the pharmaceutical industry, and the reason that medical error is currently the third leading cause of death in America. This is not an indictment against doctors. More than anyone, they are under the stranglehold of the single largest lobbying power in Washington. Every year, the pharmaceutical industry spends at least twice the amount as big oil to influence laws, policies, and public perception. Thanks to Mr. Rockefeller, the architect of American monopolies, no industry has more power over our lives than Big Pharma. According to legend, young Bill Gates built his computer empire out of his garage. Reality tells another story, that Bill Gates was born into wealth and privilege. Both his grandfather and great-grandfather were banking moguls. His father, William Gates Sr., was a prominent Seattle-based lawyer and political lobbyist. Through his father, Bill Gates learned the ins and outs of law and politics and how to manipulate those governing forces.
I'm Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft.
Bill Gates dropped out of college to start Microsoft. He is credited with inventing the operating system that became Windows. However, he played no part in the invention of Windows. The fact is, he bought an existing operating system from Seattle Computer Products, had it modified, then licensed it to IBM. That didn't stop him from taking all the credit.
I don't see Bill Gates as this great creative person. I see him as an opportunist.
While Microsoft's co-founder Paul Allen was struggling with cancer, Bill Gates seized the opportunity by attempting to cheat him out of his share of the company's fortune.
They were basically talking about how they were planning to dilute my share down to almost nothing. And it was really a shocking and disheartening moment for me.
And you were sick?
Well, I think I was still probably in the middle of radiation therapy.
Gates' business strategies came under fire in 1998 when the United States Department of Justice sued Microsoft for antitrust violations.
This is tape 3 of the videotaped deposition of Bill Gates on September.
During the 18-month trial, Gates gave hours of videotaped testimony.
What were the non-Microsoft browsers that you were concerned about in January of 1996?
That month.
Yes, sir.
And what about it?
What non-Microsoft browsers were you concerned about in January of 1996?
I don't know what you mean concerned.
What is it about the word concerned that you don't understand?
I'm not sure what you mean by it.
The Justice Department has charged Microsoft with engaging in anti-competitive and exclusionary practices designed to maintain its monopoly in personal computer operating systems.
In a move to overshadow the negative press, Gates invested $100 million to set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Overnight, Bill Gates transformed his public image from ruthless tech monopolizer to the world's most generous philanthropist.
I'm pleased to announce that we're pledging an additional $1 billion to
We had the chance to witness Bill Gates 2.0, the man you don't know.
The rebranding campaign paid off. His net worth swiftly doubled, earning Bill Gates the title of richest man in the world.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that, and it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
In a Wall Street essay, Bill Gates declared vaccines the best investment I've ever made.
There's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
The Gates Foundation expanded rapidly into a massive, vertically integrated, multinational corporation, controlling every step in a supply chain that reaches from its Seattle-based boardrooms to the villages of Africa and Asia.
Is the world's largest private philanthropy causing harm? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has made millions of dollars each year from companies blamed for many of the same social and health problems the foundation seeks to address. The Gates Foundation has investments in 69 of the worst polluting companies in the U.S. and Canada. Other companies in the foundation's portfolio have been accused of transgressions, including forcing thousands of people to lose their homes, supporting child labor, defrauding and neglecting patients in need of medical care. The Gates Foundation has not provided details.
William H. Gates III and Melinda French Gates.
As a top donor to both the WHO and the CDC, no one man has more power than Bill Gates to influence and control the health and medical freedom of all people.
Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
This will be the new normal until a vaccine is developed.
Until we find a vaccine, going back to normal means putting lives at risk.
We need to produce it and to deploy it in every single corner of the world.
Full vaccination of our children and pregnant women.
Development of new vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics.
And before effective vaccines and therapeutics are developed.
We've already bought the syringes. We already know where it's going to happen. We're thinking about what that's going to be. It's all part of this plan.
Our military is now being mobilized, so at the end of the year, we're going to be able to give it to a lot of people.
Let's have a closer look at the effects of our great benefactors' actions, shall we? Between 2000 and 2017, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation massively enforced their new polio vaccine on the children of India. 500,000 children under the age of 5 became paralyzed. The Indian people were furious, and as a result, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was thrown out of the country in 2017. Yet, less than 2 years later, they were allowed back in, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was awarded by Bill Gates for his efforts to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's nothing money can't buy.
In 1986, President Ronald Reagan signed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, granting total immunity to vaccine manufacturers. After a decade of lawsuits related to vaccine injuries and deaths, vaccine makers were going bankrupt. In a move to coerce policymakers, vaccine companies threatened to stop making vaccines until they could be legally shielded from liability. To this day, when someone is injured or killed as the result of an adverse reaction, it is the U.S. taxpayers that pay for the damages.
Welcome back. Were several Indian tribal girls used as guinea pigs? The report alleges that 2 American pharma giants' untested vaccine was administered to thousands of tribal girls without proper study and paperwork.
India was among the hardest hit after Bollywood celebrities were incentivized by the Gates Foundation to urge the public to submit to mass vaccinations. In 2009, tribal children were administered the HPV vaccine. Over 24,000 girls were told they were being given wellness shots, in many cases without the informed consent of a parent or a guardian.
The people that were administering these vaccines lied to the guardians of these girls and told the girls, oh, this is going to cure cancer, you're never going to have cancer. And these girls became severely injured. Some of them developed seizures, some of them developed cancer, and 7 girls died. And there was no insurance, there was no assistance for them. And the Gates Foundation denied that it had been clinical trials. And it was so bad that the parliament in India created a task force, they studied it, and they kicked out the Gates Foundation.
But India is a barbaric country. Things happen here in a very barbaric way. But I was surprised to find an American organization operating in broad daylight, doing things in a very, very, let's say, Indian fashion. And so the route I took was that I want the whole procedure to be investigated. The Indian Parliament formed a committee, and it was to me a rather surprising move because you generally don't often have such a high-level inquiry into matters affecting poor people. And that was such an extraordinary report. I don't think Indian Parliament has ever come out with such a scathing report. And the government officials came up and said, we shouldn't have authorized this. We're sorry. We're not going to allow them again. And now they're back doing their same old tricks again.
The good news is that human clinical trials can start as early as July 2020 for India's first COVID-19 indigenous vaccine that's been developed by Bharat Biotech.
So you can imagine how the manipulation of the media, by the media, the manipulation of public opinion by leaders from all political parties unanimously saying, we want a vaccine. And the worst thing is they are taken as philanthropists, whereas what this actually is the acquisition of political and financial power.
When you were here before, couldn't look you in the eye. You're just like an angel. Your skin makes me cry. You float like a feather in a beautiful world. I wish wish I was special. You're so fucking special. But I'm a creep. I'm a widow. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. I don't care if it hurts. I wanna have control. I want a perfect body. I want a perfect soul. And I want you to notice when I'm not around. You're so fucking special. I wish I was special, but I'm a creep. I'm a weirdo. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. Yeah, yeah. She's running out again. Whatever makes you happy, whatever you want, you're so fucking special. I wish I was special, but I'm a weirdo. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. I places where all the things meet, yeah. No change, I can change, I can change, I can change, but I'm here in my mold. I am here in my mold, but I'm a million different people from one day to the next. I can change my mold. No, 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 well, I've never prayed, but tonight I'm on my knees, yeah. I need to hear some sounds that recognize the pain in me, yeah. I let the melody shine, let it cleanse my mind. I feel free now. The airwaves are clean and there's nobody singing to me now. No change, I can change, I can change, I can change, but I'm here in my mold. I am here in my mold, and I'm a million different people from one day to the next. I can change my mold. No, 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 no. I can change it. No, I can change it. 'Cause it's a bittersweet symphony that's life. Trying to make ends meet, trying to find someone and then you die. You know I can change, I can change, I can change, I can change, but I'm here in my mold. I am here in my mold, and I'm a million different people from one day to the next. I can change my mold. No, 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 no. It's got to take your violence, melody and silence. Can't change my violence. No, no, no violence. Can't change my
Just like a zoo or aquarium. Just like farm animals or pets. We have been domesticated and programmed by an elite. We have been born into a genius system of control, through the false portrayal of democracy and free choice. The individuality of products allows for the farmed consumers to feel as if they are making decisions and are free. When in reality, their decisions are more like a choose-your-own-adventure book, whereby their options are limited to just a select number of choices, pre-chosen by the elite, where their options are pitched as convenience, when in truth they are always leading to more inconvenience. Just as our consumer choices are manufactured by corporations and cults, as too are our political options. Every few years we all get to choose red or blue. The famous occult colors of fire or ice, just like the Freemasons' two towers, with one red and one blue, they have cleverly used these two primary colors to pitch people against one another for thousands of years. All of this, I mean literally all of this entire system, has been designed.
Within the packaged food industry, there are a number of other major companies, such as Unilever, the Coca-Cola Company, Mondelez, and Nestlé. On this image, you see that virtually every well-known brand in the packaged food industry belongs to one of these corporations. You can easily get this kind of information. You can verify it on the websites of the relevant brands or on Wikipedia. Companies of this size are usually publicly traded and have a board where the largest shareholders call the shots. On websites like Yahoo Finance, we can find detailed company information, including who the largest shareholders of these companies are. Let's take PepsiCo again as an example. We see that 73.14% of the shares are held by no less than 3,379 institutional investors. These include investment companies, mutual funds, insurance companies, banks, and in some cases, governments. Let's look at who the largest institutional investors of PepsiCo are. As you can see, just 10 out of the 3,379 investors account for almost 1/3 of all shares. The combined share capital of these top 10 has a value of approximately $60 billion. But of those 10 investors, 3 own more shares than the remaining 7. Let's remember their names and let's see who owns the most shares at the Coca-Cola Company, Pepsi's big competitor. We see that just like with PepsiCo, the majority of the shares are held by institutional investors. Let's look at the top 10 and start with the last one of them. 4 out of these 6 institutional investors we also saw at the last 6 of PepsiCo. These are Norton Trust, JP Morgan Chase, Geody Capital Management, and Wellington Management. Now, let's look at the 4 largest shareholders. 3 of these we also saw in the top 4 at PepsiCo. They are BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And there's another one, Berkshire Hathaway. These are the 4 largest investment companies on the planet. PepsiCo and Coca-Cola are anything but competitors. But also the other big companies that own many brands, such as Unilever, Mondelez, and Nestlé, are owned by the same small group of institutional investors. And you don't only find these names in the packaged food industry. For example, let's look up on Wikipedia what the largest companies are within the technology industry. Facebook owns WhatsApp and Instagram. Together with Twitter, they form the most popular social media platforms in the world. Alphabet is the parent company of all Google businesses, including YouTube and Gmail, but they are also the biggest sponsors and developers of Android, one of the 2 operating systems on which almost all smartphones and tablets in the world run. The other operating system is Apple's iOS. Finally, if we add Microsoft to the other 3, we see that 4 companies produce the software that almost all computers, tablets and smartphones in the world depend on. Let's see who owns the most shares of these powerful companies. If we look at Facebook, we see that more than 80% of the shares are owned by institutional investors. These are the same names we saw in the food industry. Again, the same investors at the top. Then Twitter, which with Facebook and Instagram makes up the top 3. Amazingly, we see that the company is also owned by the same investors. We see them at Apple, but also with their big competitor Microsoft. When we look at all the other companies that dominate the technology industry and build our computers, TVs, smartphones, and household appliances, we see the same big investors who own a majority of the shares. We see this within all industries around the world. And just to show you that I'm not exaggerating, I'll give you another example. Let's say we want to plan a vacation. On our computer or smartphone, we look for a cheap flight to the sun through websites like Skyscanner and Expedia, both of which belong to the same group of institutional investors. We fly with one of the many airlines, of which the majority of the shares are often owned by the same investors or by governments, like Air France-KLM. The aircraft we fly is in most cases a Boeing or an Airbus. Again, we see the same names. We look for a hotel or an apartment through Booking.com or Airbnb.com. Once we arrive at our destination, we go out for dinner, then we write a review on TripAdvisor. The same investors are at the basis of every aspect of our journey, and their power goes even much further, because even the kerosene that fuels the plane comes from one of their many oil companies and refineries. Just like the steel that the plane is made of comes from one of their many mining companies. This small club of investment companies, banks and mutual funds are also the largest shareholders in the primary industries, where raw materials come from. If we look on Wikipedia for the largest mining companies in the world, we see that their shareholders are the same institutional investors we see everywhere else. The same goes for the largest agricultural companies in the world, that our entire food industry depends on. For example, they own Bayer, the parent company of Monsanto, the world's largest seed producer, which produces 90% of all the cotton seed on Earth, as well as the majority of all other seeds. But these institutional investors are also the shareholders of the largest textile manufacturing companies in the world, and even the numerous popular clothing brands that turn the cotton into the clothes we wear are owned by the same group of investors. Whether we have the world's largest solar panel producers or the largest oil refineries, the shares are managed by the same companies. They own the tobacco companies, who produce all the popular tobacco brands in the world. But they also own all the major companies in the pharmaceutical industry and the scientific institutes that produce the drugs. They own the companies that produce our metals and raw materials, and the entire automobile, aircraft and arms industry where those metals and raw materials are processed. They own the companies that build our electronics. They own the big department stores and online marketplaces. And even the payment methods that we use to pay for their products. Because I want to keep my story as short as possible, I've decided to only show the tip of the iceberg. If you decide to investigate on your own, using the sources that you've just seen, then you will discover that even many of the most well-known insurance companies, banks, construction companies, telephone companies, restaurant chains, and cosmetic brands are owned by the same institutional investors we just saw. These institutional investors are, as I told you earlier, mainly investment companies, banks and insurance companies. They are in turn also owned by shareholders. Now, what is the most amazing thing? All of these institutional investors own each other's shares, and together they form an immense network that we can compare to a pyramid. The smaller institutional investors are owned by larger investors, who in turn belong to even larger investors. The visible top of this pyramid consists of only two companies, and we have seen their names many times by now. They are Vanguard and BlackRock. The power of these two companies is something we can barely imagine. Not only are they the largest institutional investors of every major company on Earth, they also own the other institutional investors of those companies, giving them a complete monopoly. According to a report by Bloomberg, one of the most respected institutions in the world in the field of financial data and analytics, experts expect that by 2028, both companies will collectively manage about $20 trillion in investments, and in the process will own almost everything on Earth. The same Bloomberg called BlackRock the fourth arm of government, because it is the only non-government entity that has a close relationship with the federal banks, also called the central banks. BlackRock not only lends money to the federal banks, but is also their principal advisor and the developer of the computer system that the federal banks use. Dozens of BlackRock employees had senior positions in the White House during the Bush and the Obama administrations, and currently under Joe Biden. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink is a welcome guest with many heads of state and politicians, and understandably so. He's the face of the company that pulls the strings. Yet Larry Fink does not pull the strings himself. In fact, BlackRock itself is owned by shareholders. And if we look at who those shareholders are, we come to a strange conclusion. We see that BlackRock's largest shareholder is Vanguard, and this is where it gets dark. Vanguard itself has a unique structure that makes it impossible to see who its shareholders or clients are. The elite who own Vanguard don't want anyone to know that they are the owners of the most powerful company on Earth. But of course, this is no secret to those who are willing to look into it. Reports by Oxfam and Bloomberg show that 1% of the world's population collectively owns more money than the other 99%. Indeed, Oxfam claims that as much as 82% of all the money earned in 2017 went to this 1% of people. Naturally, those who own the most powerful company on Earth would also be the richest among this 1%. In other words, they are part of the 0.001%. Forbes, the most well-known business magazine in the world, claims that by March 2020 there were some 2,075 billionaires. Oxfam's report showed that 2/3 of all these billionaires obtained their fortune through inheritances and monopolies. So this means that Vanguard is in the hands of the richest families on Earth. If we study their history, we discover that these families have always belonged to the top of the pyramid, some even well before the Industrial Revolution began. Because their history is so interesting and extensive, I will explain some more about them in the follow-up video that I'm currently working on. But in order not to elaborate too far, I will just point out that many of these families belong to royal bloodlines, and they are the founders of our banking system, the United Nations, and every industry in the world. These families never lost their power, but because of an increasing world population, they were forced to hide behind investment companies such as Vanguard, whose largest shareholders are the private funds and non-profit organizations of these families. To make the bigger picture more clear, I need to briefly explain something about these non-profit organizations. These are the links that connect the business community with politics and the media, allowing major conflicts of interest. At first glance, however, this is not too noticeable. Non-profits, also called foundations, are organizations that rely on donations, and they do not have to publish from whom they receive those donations. They can invest this money in whatever they want, and do not have to pay tax on their profits as long as those profits are reinvested in other projects that they are involved in. Non-profits can move hundreds of billions of dollars from invisible investors. According to a report by the Australian government, this makes non-profit organizations ideal to finance terrorist groups and launder large sums of money. The foundations and funds of the families who are highest in the hierarchy of the 1% hide behind the scenes as much as possible. However, for cases that have a lot of publicity and attention, they use the foundations of philanthropist families that are lower in the ranking but who are also extremely wealthy. In order to be concise, I will only highlight the 3 most important foundations in the world that connect all the industries in the world to each other. These are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundations of the controversial multi-billionaire George Soros, and the Clinton Foundation. According to the official website of the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation is the largest funder of the World Health Organization, after President Donald Trump halted the funding of the WHO by the US in 2020. This makes the Gates Foundation one of the most influential organizations in the world in the area of everything that relates to our health. The Gates Foundation has a close partnership with the 16 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, including Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, BioNTech and Bayer, and we have just seen who own the most shares of these companies. Among others, all CBS channels, Paramount, where the most famous movies and series in the world come from, MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, the popular British Channel 5 and the popular Australian 10. Guess who the largest shareholders of Viacom CBS are? Before we look at the other major conglomerates, let's not forget to mention our extremely powerful streaming monopolists, Netflix and Amazon Prime, both of which belong to the same shareholders. Then AT&T, which is the parent company of Warner Brothers, HBO, Discovery Channel, CNN, Cartoon Network, TNT, DC, and many other well-known brands. Guess who the largest shareholders of AT&T are? The third one is the all-powerful News Corp. This company owns many of the most well-known national and regional newspapers, magazines and TV channels in the US, the UK and Australia. The shares of News Corp are owned by the American multi-billionaire Rupert Murdoch and by the institutional investors we see everywhere else. News Corp's sister company is Fox Corporation, which is also one of the most powerful media conglomerates on Earth. Just like News Corp, it is owned by the Murdoch family and the usual investors. Then the Walt Disney Company, a conglomerate of unimaginable dimensions, with many subsidiaries such as Pixar, Marvel, 20th Century, Lucasfilm, ABC, National Geographic, and Hulu. Who are their biggest shareholders? Another powerful media conglomerate is Comcast. This is the parent company of NBC, DreamWorks, Universal, the Sky Group, Focus Features, Xfinity, and many other major media brands. As you would expect, their largest shareholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. I could go on for hours and show that in almost every country on Earth, the local media is in the hands of these kind of conglomerates, which in turn are owned by our institutional investors or by extremely rich and powerful elite families. In the UK, for example, virtually all popular newspapers and magazines are owned by the Daily Mail Group, Reach, and the aforementioned News Corp. In the Netherlands, the entire media is in the hands of the Persgroep, Mediahuis and Bertelsmann. And in Germany, the entire media is either controlled by the German government, ProSiebenSat.1, Axel Springer, and again Bertelsmann, which is also a conglomerate of unprecedented dimensions. Not only is this the parent company of the largest book publisher in the world, Penguin Random House, and owner and founder of BMG Music, Bertelsmann also controls a large part of the European media through their subsidiary RTL, a company with 67 TV channels, 10 streaming platforms and 38 radio stations. Bertelsmann is owned by the ultra-rich Bertelsmann-Mohn family, who openly collaborated with the Nazis. Because of this, Reinhard Mohn was held as a prisoner of war in the US. Besides RTL, Bertelsmann also owns a large part of the French mainstream media. And together with Mediaset, the powerful Italian conglomerate of former President Berlusconi that controls the most important part of the Italian mainstream media, they also own all popular Spanish TV channels. Now, to complete the picture, let's look at where the news comes from that all these media outlets are feeding us on a daily basis. The various news media do not produce their news themselves, but use information and images from news agencies such as Reuters, the Dutch ANP, and the French AFP. These organizations are anything but independent. Reuters is owned by the powerful Canadian Thomson family. The ANP is owned by Dutch investor Kees Omen, and the AFP is largely financed by the French government. The main journalists and editors who work at our media or at these news agencies are affiliated with important journalistic organizations, such as the European Journalism Centre. These are one of the largest funders of media-related projects across Europe. They train journalists, produce study materials, give internships at, for example, the ANP, and work closely with the world's largest corporations such as Google and Facebook. For journalistic analysis and opinion, all the major media outlets in the world use Project Syndicate, the most powerful organization within its field. It supplies the 506 most important media outlets in 156 countries. Project Syndicate, plus an organization such as the European Journalism Centre, together with the news agencies, are the connecting link between all the different media outlets around the world. When newscasters read the news from their teleprompters, there is a good chance that the text comes from one of these organizations. As a result, the global media is often synchronized in its reporting.
We are concerned about troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 In September 2020, the European Journalism Centre and Facebook set up a fund to support selected news organizations to do the reporting during the corona crisis. Let's see who the organizations are that, along with the news agencies, produce our news. At Project Syndicate, we see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, and the European Journalism Centre. Then the European Journalism Centre itself. Again we see the Gates Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. And they also receive large donations from Facebook, Google, the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The organizations that are at the heart of our information flow are funded by the non-profit organizations of the same elite who also controls the entire media. However, a part of our tax money goes to these organizations as well.
From the celebrities you admire, to the politicians you dislike. From the brands you love, to the companies you despise. From your favorite sports team, to your favorite athlete. From your favorite social media platform, to your favorite streaming service online. All of it is part of this manufactured reality. All of it keeps you in the zoo, and keeps you distracted from the bars of your cage. All of the world you and I knew is completely fake, and the only way one can ever progress to a career writing or singing the songs we love, or acting in or producing the films we worship, is to agree to join one of these cults, and to continually compromise our ethics, to do what they tell us to keep up the conditioning of our species. This economy is built on exploitation and slavery, and it literally will cease to exist without it. As such, poverty and wars may go on forever. As may the unnecessary and unhealthy mistreatment of other species, so to encourage us to accept the same mistreatment of us. The system was originally developed through maritime laws and piracy, back when the priorities of our species lay mostly with voyaging and colonialism of land. The whole system of trade is still based on oceanic laws, as if we were all actually just living on the ocean, and we are all still essentially considered cattle or products of the pirates who own us. The system of births, deaths, and marriages ensures that no one can trade or participate in this manufactured economy, without first sacrificing or trading their own child when it's first born, to join this system. By registering our kids through this system, they are assigned an ID tracking number making them a citizen of that country and giving them the rights to trade or apply for some financial support. However, they will still have to also apply for a tax file number, just like a barcode, with the taxation department. You see, all of us are still essentially just prisoners of Mother England. We accept this system knowing something's profoundly wrong simply because we are kept distracted every day. First with kindergarten, then with primary school, the primary time of conditioning a child to accept this system and to quit asking questions, and then with high school and university, the first 20+ years of our life are spent in programming centers, where we are told what and how we should think. If we do not go to these schools, or once we finally can leave them, then we get a job and work 5 to 6 days per week, and when we get home switch on news media to be told what we should think about politics and our world, or we switch on streaming shows or video games as a form of escapism from the system. And yet we actually are just going further into that system of conditioning. We are even taught by television shows and films that we should read newspapers or watch news media to get objective information about politicians, celebrities, history, or our country, or geopolitical matters. Yet the objective truth is simply that these media establishments have never been established to provide people with fact-based information, but are simply propaganda set up by the very cults and elites who have built this whole system. They are of course the builders of empire. The servants of the crown. The average person will never escape their prison of the mind until they can first see these bars.